Hello, everyone. This is Tri Delta's fraternity president, Kimberly DeFady Sullivan. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and healthy during this time. Thank you for spending time with us today, participating in the 2020 Proposed Bylaws Amendment Town Hall discussion. This call will be recorded and will be accessible for you and other members after its completion. Today, you have 5 facilitators that will be helping you navigate through our proposed bylaws amendments. First, you have the amazing Deborah Johnson as chair of the 2018-2020 Bylaws Committee. Then you have the very smart Jane Smith and the very thoughtful Laura White, who complete our Bylaws Committee. You also have me as your fraternity president, and then you have our outstanding Tri Delta CEO, Karen White. We also have our amazing parliamentarian and Tri Delta member, Carol Farmer, on the call also. Now I will turn it over to our chair of the Bylaws Committee, Deborah Johnson, to introduce today's agenda.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good afternoon, sisters. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as Kimberly introduced me, I serve Tri Delta as our bylaws chair, and I hope that you learn a little bit more about our bylaws before our upcoming convention that's just in over 2 weeks. So first today, we're going to go over our agenda. We're going to look a little bit at our courtesy resolutions. We're going to have a fraternity bylaws overview, the concept of the consent agenda during the business meeting, and attendee responsibilities. We'll look at the town hall purpose and its guidelines. We'll go through a question and answer session. Then we will entertain the business resolutions submitted by the executive board and its 2 resulting amendments. Then we'll get into the rest of the proposed amendments and have questions and answers that you can look in through the chat feature of the webinar. We'll do our best to answer all your questions, and if they're not answered during this time, someone will circle back to you so that you're prepared for the business meeting of convention. Courtesy resolutions. Courtesy resolutions members can submit until July 1st. Normally, in our regular convention, we would be doing those and accepting them on site. But in this world, we're going to take them throughout up to July 1st through our business meeting. And then we need that little bit of time to be able to prepare them for the awesome presentation that we will do to accept them by acclamation at the virtual convention on July 11th. So you can send those to bylaws@trideltaeo.org, and the resolutions committee will assemble them. As for the fraternity bylaws overview, first let's look at the purpose of the bylaws. They guide the executive board's governance of the organization. Bylaws are the most important legal document of any organization, whether it's a corporation, association, or partnership. Bylaws outline the day-to-day rules for our organization and provide comprehensive guidelines to keep things running smoothly. We like to think of the bylaws as a house. So imagine you have a house and you start with a foundation that has walls and a roof. Tri Delta's organizational blueprint is the bylaws. This blueprint must contain the information needed for the executive board to govern effectively and efficiently. A well-built house has rooms that have both doors and windows. You would never build a foundation on sand. Rather, you would have a strong foundation in case any movement of the earth, the house will stay strong. Rarely would an architect build a room that does not have a door or at least a window. Just like a house, a bylaws structure should be built with windows and doors. We always want room to move within a house. You wouldn't lock yourself into a room. You always want a door or at least a window for an escape route in case of an emergency. And bylaws work in much the same way. Bylaws provide an organization room to govern so that in case of emergency, there is room for the organization to govern effectively. They give our board options so they can govern in the best way that they can. Our bylaws are amended every 2 years by a vote of our delegates. Bylaws are proposed by you, our members, the executive board, volunteers, staff, committees, professional staff, Lots and lots of information comes to the Bylaws Committee. We are not the authors of the bylaws, we are the scriveners. We take the recommendations of others and evaluate them, and they are eventually become a proposed amendment. And once adopted at convention, they are immediately in effect. I will now turn it over to our fabulous parliamentarian, Carol Farmer, who's going to explain to us the concept of the consent agenda and how it will be utilized at this virtual convention. Carol?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this very important parliamentary tool that we'll be using. A consent agenda can be likened to a motion that introduces a number of items. In our case, it's going to be bylaws amendments. For a single vote, to adopt all items included in that consent agenda. The amendments will not be read, and there will be no discussion prior to that one vote. To protect the rights of the convention delegates and attendees, one person may remove any amendment from the consent agenda. This will allow the amendment to be read and debated and voted upon separately as part of the Bylaws Committee report. Many of the 70+ amendments to be considered do not change policy, do not affect collegiate or alumni chapters, and simply update language to reflect current practices. Some amendments do affect change, and those may be removed and debated fully. It's important to understand that amendments you wish to discuss can be identified and removed from the consent agenda before it is voted upon. Once the consent agenda is adopted, those amendments will not be read or discussed as they are adopted by the convention as part of the consent agenda. Identifying which amendments come to the convention floor for discussion is the responsibility of you as a member of the convention body. Please read and review the 70+ amendments you will receive via email. You will have the right to remove any amendments you wish to discuss and vote by a separate vote. Your course of action to remove amendments is to notify the Bylaws Committee. You can do this prior to the business meeting via the email shown on the next slide. Please plan to identify amendments by their number. You will have the opportunity to remove amendments at the time the consent agenda is introduced by the fraternity president during the business session on July 11th. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact me or the Bylaws Committee at the same email address. The bylaws of any organization must be fluid and its members willing to embrace change. I look forward to working with all of you to revise our fraternity bylaws and to meet the requisites of a premier women's organization now and into the future. Thanks so much.
Well, welcome everyone. I just wanted to discuss the purpose for our town hall today. And the main purpose is to really educate our members on the bylaws and the proposed amendments. Today will allow an opportunity for you all to ask questions about the proposed amendments to help prepare you for the actual convention business meeting in a few weeks. So today we will not be debating the proposed amendments. The actual debate will occur during the convention business meeting, but we'd be glad to answer any questions you might have regarding the proposed amendments during our discussion today. Laura?
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, Thank you, Jane. This is Laura White, member of the Bylaws Committee, and I'm going to go over the Town Hall guidelines. So as you can see at the bottom of your Ring Central screen, there is a question and answer box where you can already see that questions are sitting and waiting for responses. So if you have questions on anything, we ask you to please put that in there, in that question and answer box, not the chat box. The chat box will not be functioning for this webinar. If you have already looked at your amendments and have questions down the line, feel free to enter those questions now. Please make sure that you do reference your name, the chapter you represent or your volunteer role, and that proposed amendment number. That's very important so that we can make sure that as we go along with our program, we will try to answer that in order as we're discussing that amendment. You can also also, if for some reason your questions aren't answered, as we said at the beginning, feel free to send an email to the bylaws@trideltaeo.org. There might be something very specific about your question that might relate to your specific chapter that you don't want to talk about in front of everyone else. Feel free to just let us know, and then we're happy to answer or get the appropriate staff member to follow up on those questions. Thank you so much. And I will pass this over to Kimberly to discuss our business resolutions.
Hello, everyone. The business resolution that I'm going to talk to you about today has been unfolding for some time, and so I do want to address this. As the events of the past few weeks have unfolded, TriDelta's Executive Board has taken some time to listen and learn about the complex issues surrounding racism in society at large, in higher education, and within our own organization. We've had intentional conversations with collegiate and alumni members, as well as advisors, mentors, and confidants. We are grateful to all who have shared their insights and experiences, most especially our Black, Indigenous, and Sisters of Color. We heard again and again that many of our members believe we have the opportunity and the responsibility to do more to amplify diverse voices as we live out TriDelta's purpose. Along the way, the Executive Board met numerous times to talk about strategies for creating an equitable and inclusive experience for all of our members, but most notably our Black, Indigenous, and Sisters of Color. This work resulted in the development of a comprehensive action plan designed to address systemic racism. The plan is called Lead Now and is built on 3 pillars. Brave, activities designed to identify and dismantle systemic racism. Bold, programs and efforts to promote education, understanding, and healing among our sisters. Kind, tools and resources to equip our members in the fight for equality and justice. This plan will be anchored in our organization-wide diversity audit and a new volunteer structure to support TriDelta's diversity, equity, and inclusion work. To ensure the completion of this work, the 2018-2020 Executive Board and the slated 2020-22 Executive Board Director, Susan Woda, will submit a formal business resolution at Convention 2020 on July 11th. I'd like to share this resolution with you now. Whereas TriDelta was founded in 1888 as a society that would be kind alike to all, thinking more of a woman's character than her outward appearance or personal circumstance. And whereas today, TriDelta is an assembly of more than 240,000 women with shared values and virtues rooted in kindness, with an open motto that calls to steadfastly love one another, and with a purpose that requires us to help other members, our members, become the best versions of themselves. And whereas TriDelta was the first organization in the National Panhellenic Conference to establish a non-discrimination policy, demonstrating our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion as a way to live into our values and virtues, and to uphold our open motto and purpose. We reaffirmed this commitment in 2018 as TriDelta's 58th convention called all members to live kind, lead kind. And whereas today, humbly and with heavy hearts, we acknowledge our efforts have not come far enough or fast enough in addressing the complex issues surrounding systemic racism within society, higher education, and our own organization. And whereas the time is now to condemn and confront the bias, hate, bigotry, and violence that fuels racism, and to focus on bringing about actionable, measurable, and lasting change within TriDelta and among her members. Therefore, be it resolved, TriDelta's 59th convention, on behalf of the organization's collegiate and alumni members, commits to lead now with the goal of creating an equitable and inclusive lifetime membership experience for all of TriDelta's current and future members, most notably our Black, Indigenous, and Sisters of Color. Be it further resolved that the entire membership of Tri Delta shares the responsibility to lead now by bravely identifying and dismantling systemic racism, boldly promoting education, understanding, and healing, and fighting for equality and justice with kindness and a renewed commitment to all we hold true. This resolution will be presented for adoption by the convention body during the new business portion of the convention business meeting on July 11th. The resolution refers specifically to the Lead Now action plan. One of the key components of the plan is to ensure diverse and equitable representation at all levels of Tri Delta, including the board level. We recognize that to bring about the changes that are needed, we need more diverse voices and perspectives at the highest levels of our organization. For this reason, the Executive Board and the Leadership Development Committee have proposed 2 new amendments to the fraternity bylaws. LDC Committee Chair Lyndon Wolf McClendon is on the call today to review these with you. Just checking that we've unmuted Linda.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Thank you, Kimberly. The LDC is so pleased to partner with the Executive Board on this work. The proposed bylaws amendments are numbers 67A and 67B. Amendment 67A would change the language in Article 7, Convention, Section 7A1. Amendment 67B would change the language in Article 8, Fraternity Officers, Section 1A. These amendments will change the composition of the Executive Board from a president and 4 directors to a president and up to 6 directors. If approved by the convention, this would be effective August 1st, 2020, and would create 2 immediate vacancies on the Executive Board. These vacancies will be filled by the Leadership Development Committee as currently outlined in the bylaws. You should know that the LDC has worked with both the Housing and Foundation boards in a similar fashion in recent years to fill board vacancies. So we stand ready and proud to assist the Executive Board.
Based on all we've learned as a board over the past few weeks, we feel now is the time to build on Tri Delta's long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion by adding the valuable perspectives of our Black, Indigenous, and Sisters of Color to the Executive Board. In part, this is acknowledgement that our efforts on the diversity and inclusion front have not come far enough or fast enough. We say that with great humility and an eye toward the future. To this end, the Executive Board has charged the LDC to focus on filling the Executive Board vacancies created by these amendments with Sisters of Color.
This is definitely a bold move, but it's one the Executive Board and the LDC feel Tri Delta is ready for as an organization. And it's one we know our members, especially our collegiate members, are more than ready for. And as one board member said this week, it's a move that places Tri Delta on the right side of history.
We also feel that Tri Delta, like so many other organizations, has a moment in time, this moment, to be brave and bold and to lead now with kindness. Kindness is the fight against the bias, hate, bigotry, and violence that fuel discrimination and racism, and kindness in the fight for equality, liberty, and justice.
Thank you, Kimberly and Linda. Let's pause here and see what questions the audience may have.
This is Karen White from Tri Delta's Executive Office, and there is a question in the chat from an anonymous attendee that asks about discussing critical race theory before adopting its premises. Our listener says that she doesn't believe systemic racism exists today, but she especially doesn't think it exists within Tri Delta. So she's asked if anyone can point to where there are current racist written and practiced policies within Tri Delta Kimberly, I thought this would be a good question for you to answer within the context of the organization-wide diversity audit that's a part of the Lead Now plan.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to the member who asked that question. We want to know what's going on. We want to understand where racism is and within Tri-Delta and within our organization. In order to make action and to make a change, we need to first understand what the problem is. And so we are looking to hire possibly an outside source to look within our organization to see if there are ways that we don't even understand or realize what we have done or what we are doing to create blocks, to create racism within the organization. So we are looking to hire a company. This would be something that would happen through the Lead Now plan.
Thank you, Kimberly. Melissa Hall, the chairman of our Fraternity Member Status Committee, may also have some commentary around this that would be helpful around this question. Melissa, are you available to jump in here?
If not,
Melissa,
Karen,
can you?
this is
Oh yeah,
Karen, we can talk about it too.
Yeah, I was going to ask that she unmute her phone. And we'll wait for that for just a second. And then Kimberly, did you have another comment?
No, I just was
Oh,
I
I'm
comment. If
I'm
Melissa can get on.
sorry
Okay.
about that. So I'm sorry about the delay. I am Melissa Hall. I'm chair of the Fraternity Member Status Committee. What I would say to the questioner who asks the question about systemic racism is I certainly am not an expert in critical race theory, but in the last biennium, my committee and I have considered a large number of cases from all regions of the country where Tri-Delta has collegiate chapters involving racist speech and racist acts. And so what I would say is, however you want to categorize the problem, this is very much an issue facing our collegiate women and our collegiate chapters. And it's very much an issue that makes it impossible for people to take us seriously when we talk about living kind and leading kind. And so I think that unless the issue of racism and race in Tri-Delta is engaged with in a serious and thoughtful, and in this case, bold way, I don't think that we're going to make the kind of progress that our young women, our younger women are demanding of us. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That is very helpful. There's another question from Cindy Hornbaker. And Cindy asks whether there's still separate NPC and NPHC, National Pan-Hellenic Councils, over collegiate sororities. And she mentions that she believes we should have diversity, but with a separate National Pan-Hellenic Council, she feels this will be competitive. So Kimberly, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. So we do still have a National Panhellenic Conference and National Panhellenic Conference with 26 groups that we belong to. And then we do have TOWNHALL. I think that this is important move because we greatly value diversity and all it brings to our fraternity. Our members remain largely made up of white members and therefore not as diverse from race and ethnic point of view. And so we need to be continuing to make great efforts. And I think that we ask our sister organizations, whether they belong to NPC or they don't, to come along with us on this journey, because we are greater together than we are apart.
So we have another question on this front that I think is a question that Linda, as the chair of the Leadership Development Committee, could answer. And this is around the notion of meritocracy for our leaders and for ourselves. So I think the question here is how the Leadership Development Committee will work to recruit and vet and slate Black, Indigenous, sisters of color into board positions. So Linda, do you want to speak a bit to the LDC process?
Sure. Thank you, Karen. The LDC will follow the same process we do for all of our candidates. I think one of the important things to note here is that in the bylaws communication that you all received today in anticipation of this call, there's a link in that bylaws email about referring a sister that you know of or referring yourself if you fall into this category. And I think that the important thing is to make sure that we're casting a wide net so that we know about these excellent women that are out there and really being able to get these women into our pipeline and being able to have conversations with them. But as far as the process of the LDC, it will be the exact same process that every executive board member, every foundation member, foundation board member, every housing board member goes through as far as an interview process and the cultivation process that we follow for the LDC. And we will be vetting those candidates in the same way that we would vet any candidate, looking for certain competencies, looking for certain skills, and what they can bring to executive board service.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks. I think that's an important note here is for all of you on the call, you've received an email from Executive Office today. Those two links are really important. If you'd like to self-refer or refer a sister for LDC consideration, or if you'd like to self-refer or volunteer for Tri-Delta. There are two links in that email. So we'd love for you to take a look and share the word. We have another question in the chat and some thoughts that a sister has shared. So this is Paige Dobbs, and she shares that using books such as Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria, which is a great read, we see that it can be extremely challenging and stressful for Black women in particular to join a national Panhellenic conference organization where a majority of members are white. When we look at recruitment processes and the intake processes of the national Panhellenic organizations, the traditionally Black organizations, there are really distinct differences. Now, Paige comes from a higher education background, working on a campus, so this perspective is very informed. Her question here is, how can we think differently about our processes, such as recruitment, that can change to meet women of color where they are instead of waiting for women of color to come to us, maybe through formal recruitment, where oftentimes they're marginalized? And how do we teach our membership that the National Panhellenic Conference, Council rather, and the multicultural organizations were developed out of empowerment for Greek members of color, like historically Black colleges and universities were developed because other institutions were historically white. So Paige gives us lots of things to think about, and Kimberly, I know that this is a big part of what's outlined in the Lead Now action plan. So do you want to add any commentary there as we wrap up this part of the conversation?
Yes. Well, first, thank you, Paige. I always love hearing your perspective. I just want to say that the Lead Now action plan is going to be evolving. We're going to have items that Paige addressed in addition to other things that we feel need to be addressed. But as things come up, we will need to address them too. And I know our next fraternity president, Megan James, and I know our executive board, these are amazing, wonderful women, and they have such an intent to make a difference and to help Tri Delta go through all of this. And they're very open and honest people who want to hear from all of you. So as you think of all of this and you go for a run or you go for walking for purpose and you have ideas, you have suggestions, we do want to hear from you. And I know Megan, and I know that for her board priorities for the next biennium, you will see a lot of this action plan, and you'll see even more from the board as they navigate through all of this. So this is just the beginning, and I wanted to say that out loud so that you know that there is definitely more to come from Tri Delta.
Okay, this is Laura White again. Thank you, Kimberly and Karen, and everyone's input on obviously very important issues that we as a fraternity are looking to make a difference on. Now we will move on to the amendments as they've been presented in your attachments. I will let you know that from the last town hall in May to this town hall, we have made a few changes. So if you were on that last call, there are some wording changes, some clarifications that we received based on feedback from the town hall members. And just for you to know that we do listen to your comments and questions. And if there's ways that we can make things more clear, we definitely have wanted to do that. So we will go ahead and get started. The first group of amendments that I'll be presenting are in relation to Tri Delta housing. And just to give you some background, in the last fiscal year, the Board of Directors for the National House Corporation took on the large task of reviewing and updating the NHC bylaws and their certificate of formation. This work was done to update the tax status of our housing entity to better support our housing infrastructures. Included in these changes was a change to Tri Delta Housing as the official name of our housing entity. This name change and numerous changes in Tri Delta Housing bylaw content then had a trickle-down effect into the Tri Delta fraternity bylaws. In order for our documents to be in sync with each other, we are presenting these following 7 amendments to the Tri Delta Housing related to Tri Delta Housing, along with content changes so that both documents would be congruent. So we'll go ahead and get started. And the first amendment is in relation to a name change for Tri Delta Housing. So as you can see, it just goes through the document in any place where there was formerly Tri Delta National House Corporation, it's changing that name to Tri Delta Housing. And so there are multiple places in that we've done that, we're doing that. In 1A, it's also changing a list of special entities to make sure that we are covering all entities of Tri Delta. In Amendment 2, this talks to about our structure, and we are removing Tri Delta Housing from that structure as a legal protection. This was suggested by our legal counsel to better, with the changes of Tri Delta Housing to a 501c7, it was prudent to remove reference to Tri Delta Housing in this section as advised by our legal counsel. So that is why that is stricken in this section. Amendment 3 also changes, and this removes this section as it is no longer correct with the changes in the purpose of our Tri Delta Housing. So again, by legal recommendation, this section is going to be stricken from the bylaws. Amendment 4. And this is one that was updated from the last time based on assistance in wording to make this more clear. This more broadly explains the scope of House Corps and local House Corps. Not all House Corps follow a traditional model of a chapter house and such. So we wanted to make sure that we are making this statement broad enough to encompass all types of House Corps functions in terms of leasing, property, spaces, storage. As such, as we know, there are many different models and functions of our house corporations. So this wording better aligns with the multiple roles that house corporations may have in serving their chapter members. Number 5, this is we are to the fraternity bylaws. This was already an amendment or a part of the Tri-Delta Housing Board that our executive board, Tri-Delta Executive Board, has the ability to remove due to cause any director of the Tri-Delta Housing Board. So it was just felt, since it was already in the Tri-Delta Housing bylaws, that it should be reciprocated back in the fraternity bylaws. So this is not a change in practice. This is just making sure it's clear in both sets of bylaws. Amendment 6, this is a big one, but what happened is when Tri-Delta Housing updated their bylaws, they revised their purpose to be consistent with what their true functions were. And so to be clear, we wanted to make sure that we had the exact wording that they created in their purpose for Tri-Delta Housing also in our Tri-Delta fraternity bylaws. And as we're going through these, feel free to type in questions and we will address them as we go through the numbers. Amendment 7 is also related to Tri-Delta Housing, and it updates the dissolution process for a house corporation and Tri-Delta Housing if for some reason that house corporation or Tri-Delta Housing would cease to exist. So it explains the process and what would happen with the with everything in relation to their corporate holdings. Amendment 8 also discusses, it updates the bylaws to current practice, including Tri-Delta Housing as a business. So it just updates our, it writes in subsidiary organizations to make sure that we're encompassing all different parts of our organization in the wording of what is a fraternity entity. Are there any questions in the Tri-Delta Housing related amendment changes? If not, then I will pass on to Deborah.
Thanks, Laura. Proposed Amendment 9. You can see a beautiful new badge created here on your screen. Most of the National Panhellenic Conference groups have a badge for the current fraternity sorority president. The wearing of this badge is about the support of those members surrounding the president. The green circle of emeralds signify the past boards that support the current president. The 3 deltas of diamonds represent the past fraternity presidents and typify clear skies and smooth sailing. So this proposed amendment would add a special badge to the list of special emblems in Article 5. Okay. The next group of 8, I believe, amendments, we're calling the NPC, the National Panhellenic Conference Group. These proposed amendments are recommendations from our Streamlined Governance Committee and its work as the National Panhellenic Conference transitioned to a new governance model during this biennium. It gave Tri-Delta the opportunity to consider how our human capital resources can best align with NPC's revised structure, as well as support our fraternity's goals for our continued leadership within the conference. Amendment, where are we, 11? 11. Entertains removing voting rights from our NPC delegate. We realigned basically with a board of directors, a council of delegates. And so we will have the fraternity president will be serving in one of those roles. And then we may, but not necessarily so, have representation on the board of directors. And in one of these proposed amendments that is in there, we can be slated into that position, or we can be elected into that position. And we include those in our bylaws from a transparency standpoint, so that the membership knows those are possible opportunities of service on the NPC. Amendment 11 simplifies the language of postponing convention, removes the reference to the NPC delegate. Amendment 13 realigns that the NPC delegate is not necessarily a consistent fit with service on our fraternity council. Amendment 14, this was a simple typo to have that green line. Conference was in our documents and somehow I didn't get it on the slide at our May town hall. Amendment 15, with changes in the NPC governance structure, Tri-Delta will have representation, like I said, by the fraternity president on the council of delegates, and Tri-Delta may have representation on the board of directors. Amendment 16 designates that it will be the fraternity president or an executive board appointee, and this individual shall vote on behalf of the fraternity on the council of delegates. Amendment 17 is the one for transparency of potential service by a Tri-Delta on the National Panhellenic Conference Board of Directors. And that position can either be gained by election or, as I said, rotation. And I think I have one more amendment, 18 in this group. This amendment clarifies when the term of an executive board member concludes if the convention ends after August 1st. And I will turn it back over to Laura for Amendment 19.
Thanks, Deborah.
You didn't ask for questions. I'll go look in the chat feature.
Sure. For Amendment 19, this was a change needed that we found. It removes reference to a past associate director as being eligible to be appointed in a case of incapacity of an executive board member. The associate director position has not been in place for many years, and so it no longer really should have a reference in our bylaws as being someone who would be eligible to be appointed to the executive board. So that is why we are removing it in this section of fraternity officer part of the bylaws. Amendment 20 it simplifies the language regarding how the executive board may postpone a meeting in terms of the notifications that are required. We're trying to make sure that that's a little bit more customary and stated in the same ways throughout the bylaws, so that we know what's to be expected. So those are those two changes in relation to the executive board. Deborah, I think we're back to your amendments.
Thank you, Laura. These next 5 are what we're calling the Fraternity Council group. These changes came primarily out of Streamlined Governance Committee, with several changes to the structure of Fraternity Council. While in 1B, the immediate past president is removed from the Fraternity Council, in D and E, the entire boards of the fraternity and Tri-Delta Housing are included. The Streamlined Governance Committee believes with the inclusion of both the Foundation and Tri-Delta Housing boards, this makes up for the removal of the immediate past president and the NPC delegate as proposed in the following amendments. It is also suggested that the Fraternity Council meet once per biennium. So, Amendment 23 clarifies that it is the fraternity president who appoints the secretary. Amendment 24 is clarification. Amendment 25 is clarification. And demonstrating fiscal responsibility for the fraternity while utilizing video conferencing as meetings as needed. Amendment 26. This amendment allows for the continuity of service of our volunteers until new members are appointed. Amendment 27 specifies that it is the fraternity president who serves as an ex officio member on the Bylaws Committee. Amendment 28 in keeping with the purpose of the Executive Board to be a governing board of directors, the Extension Committee should be charged with the operational work of fraternity extension and the recommendations resulting from extension studies and recommendations brought to the Executive Board for approval. The Executive Board must stay focused on governance. The Extension Committee will be supported by appropriate Executive Office staff. There is a recommended suggested composition of this committee, including National Pan-Atlantic Conference knowledge, Tri-Delta housing knowledge, lending financial impact support, emerging chapters knowledge, and a volunteer with a robust higher education and Greek life and student affairs experience. The recommended list is a best practice and is wise to give the Executive Board the flexibility to have discretion in appointing the best people in these positions. These positions are to possess competencies and knowledge of the various areas to serve as a well-rounded group of people on the Extension Committee. Clear needs are a discussion of housing, financial impacts regarding extension opportunities, and what makes a strong 5 to 10 year start of a new chapter. Amendment 29. The fraternity president must allocate her time presiding over the Executive Board and the overall governance of the fraternity. It's not necessarily efficient for her to serve on the Ritual Committee, but rather discuss the recommendations presented by the Ritual Committee as given to the full Executive Board for approval. Amendment 30, as recommended by the Streamlined Governance Committee, the entire Tri-Delta enterprise would benefit from the expertise of a financial committee to provide financial oversight. The Foundation Board of Trustees has utilized a finance committee to advise them in their financial decision-making, which has proved to be very valuable for the financial health of the foundation. This amendment allows the fraternity and Tri-Delta Housing to benefit from the same financial expertise. This would create a new standing committee called the Enterprise Finance Committee. Amendment 32. This amendment further clarifies for the purpose of the current language by specifying that a Leadership Development Committee member may serve only 2 slated and elected terms total, which do not have to be consecutive. It defines the service as a collegiate member of the Leadership Development Committee, should not prevent a member from eligibility to serve 2 terms as an alumna if slated and elected at a future date. And it also clarifies the eligible terms. In the case of an appointed term due to a Leadership Development Committee unexpired vacancy of unforeseen circumstances, the LDC member elected remains eligible to serve 2 additional terms if slated and elected or having already served 2 full terms. And Amendment 33 ensures that the fraternity will utilize electronic storage and that our Chief Executive Officer will ensure that it is maintained according to the fraternity's document retention policy. So any questions on the Fraternity Council group or these? I'll look in the chat, and in the meantime, I will turn it over to Jane.
Thank you, Deborah. We're going to go over some collegiate-related proposed amendments. Amendment number 34, we are just adding electronic notice, as sometimes when a collegiate chapter is suspended or has their charter withdrawn. It can be of urgent nature. This does not preclude sometimes when we are aware that a chapter is struggling, a representative of the fraternity does make a visit to that chapter to discuss potential suspension. So this provides electronic notice, which is not only efficient, but cost-effective. Proposed amendment number 35. We're just clarifying who will receive the electronic notice. We're adding the college or university where the collegiate chapter is located. And I will send this back over.
Thank you, Jane.
Yep.
Amendment 36 describes that the executive board has the final authority, and thus the elimination of this language regarding a petition, a process. There is no actual petition procedure, and the vote by the executive board is final and binding. So per our legal counsel, this amendment is essential to prevent any confusion regarding the finality of the executive board as it pertains to a collegiate chapter. And I will turn it back over to Jane.
Thank you, Deborah. This proposed amendment is aligning our purpose and policies, supporting our executive board, maintaining governance and not operational procedures. So this is just to designate that the board can select a fraternity representative to participate in recruitment of a new collegiate chapter. Amendment 38A. This amendment emphasizes the fact that the fraternity bylaws as adopted at convention are the current bylaws that a collegiate chapter needs to follow, and they need to maintain current updated individual collegiate chapter bylaws with the fraternity. Amendment 38B, same procedure on the alumni side. Alumni chapters need to keep their individual alumni chapter bylaws current with the fraternity. Any questions on 37.8 or 37 or 38? Okay, then over to Laura.
Yeah, and then in the same way as Jane just presented, the collegiate and alumni chapter bylaws need to be current. Our third arm is our house corporations. Local house corporations will also be required to have current fraternity model bylaws registered for their local house corps. And there will be a new process starting in the next year with updated local house corporation bylaws being made available, and also an online process for those revisions. So it will hopefully be an easier process for all local house corporations. Now we are moving on to Amendment 39. And this is an amendment that was done as an interim amendment by the executive board. And what an interim amendment is a amendment approved between conventions by the executive board. It is presented, it is an important item that needs to be determined before the next convention, and the executive power is used only by the executive board when they feel an issue needs to be addressed and cannot wait until that next convention. In this instance, it was determined that the change of employment practice of house directors from previously being employed by the chapter itself and now being employed by the fraternity, that it needed to be approved at the time that this change was happening to make sure all legal and other financial ramifications were being interpreted correctly in our bylaws. So the board voted on this to make this change, and it is now coming before the convention to be ratified. And so now all house corporation house directors are employed by the fraternity based on policies and procedures. Amendment 40 is another one of those amendments that the wording has changed since our last town hall meeting. As you can see, it clarifies that a collegiate chapter utilizes a house director based on policies and procedures, and it no longer that the chapter employs the house director. We know that not every chapter necessarily meets every designation, but there are policies and procedures that determine which chapters have to have house directors. And so this brings us in the same accordance. And then I will pass on to Deborah for Amendment 41, if there are any questions.
Thank you, Laura. Proposed Amendment 41 deals with the use of the word mock ritual is more inclusive than specifically stating mock initiation to help us define when disciplinary action is needed. Any such ritual is unacceptable for any of our chapters to participate in. And to align with our fraternity's purpose, our bylaws and procedures strictly prohibit any mistreatment of our members by collegiate or alumni members. Therefore, a separate sentence separating the mock rituals discussed above from the mistreatment of members is recommended per legal counsel for emphasis to read the way it is stated on the screen. So 41A and B are similar in language. One addresses the section of the collegiate chapters, and 41B addresses the alumni chapters. And I will turn it back over to Jane.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm not so quick with that unmute. Proposed amendment number 42A, the Bylaws Committee is updating this amendment because it currently is not in alignment with our practices. Tri Delta alumni chapters no longer hand in an annual report, but they submit all information requested in a timely fashion through the use of TriConnect. This proposed amendment, 42B, follows up the prior one. We no longer require alumni chapters to have filed certain reports to participate in convention. Of course, we want to promote alumni chapters having a vote at convention, and so we are proposing this amendment. Amendment number 43, we are again catching something to update. As you can imagine, our executive board does not assume the privileges of an alumni chapter if they have not met terms of disciplinary action. That would not be in alignment with our executive board functioning and governance. Okay. Proposed amendment number 44 was proposed by a collegiate member, and it is to promote financial diversity amongst our members. Our members have one very large lump sum due prior to initiation, which includes new member fees, initiation fees, badge fees due to the corporation, and they also have fees due to the collegiate chapter. This amendment would give the individual collegiate chapters an opportunity, if they wish, to have a proposed new member get an approved installment plan for the outstanding collegiate chapter monies that might be due to the chapter, not to the money that is due to the corporation. And our collegiate members are hoping that this provides some financial relief for members who might need it. Proposed amendment number 45A, again, in updating with our current practices, the official membership records are kept at the executive office. It is a very inconsistent and not recommended practice that the chapter go back to their new member signature book or initiation signature book to update them. The official records are at the executive office. Proposed amendment number 45B same as the prior discussion of 45A. Any questions? If not, I will turn it back over to Deborah.
Thanks, Jane. Proposed Amendment 46 clarifies the causes for individual, new member, collegiate member, or alumni member discipline. Upon the strong recommendation of legal counsel that this language needs to reside in the fraternity bylaws. You'll see that line 12 on slide 1 and line 8 on slide 2 have been removed because after further discussion after the May town hall, legal counsel, the bylaws committee, and the executive board believe this language is better housed in a policies document and not in the bylaws. So it has been removed in the proposed amendment at this time. I will turn it back over to Jane.
Thank you, Deborah. This proposed amendment is to further clarify our definition of what needs to be surrendered upon resignation or termination of membership. And it is the emblems that need to be returned to executive office. We know that we could not possibly ask people to return all insignia, but clarifying that it's the emblems, such as our badge. Questions? 47B follows the same, noting that a member or new member must surrender fraternity emblems. Okay, proposed amendment number 48. This was an amendment recommended by our legal counsel to clarify the language as recommended. Proposed amendment number 49. We are just adding the badge fee, which is actually already in place and has been in place, but we noticed that it was missing here. So we just wanted to be totally transparent and inclusive by listing the badge fee there. Proposed amendment number 50. Again, updating our practices with our bylaws. When an alumni chapter is rechartered, and this is different for collegiate chapters, but when an alumni chapter might reestablish itself years later after being inactive or having previously their charter withdrawn, the alumni chapter does pay a one-time recharter fee, which is very nominal. And proposed amendment number 51.
I can take
yes,
that one, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you. I lost track there, Laura.
No problem. This just updates our current practice and the current policy of our fraternity related to insurance coverage. This language was recommended by our finance committee, who looks at all of those policies and procedures and just aligns us to make sure that we have current language related to insurance coverages. And Deborah, I will pass it on to you for fraternity finance.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Proposed Amendment 52 deals with the reimbursement of executive board members up to $1,500 is not a current practice and hasn't been used for several years. So it's removing an antiquated practice. And I'll turn it back to Laura.
Okay, and Amendment 53 just clarifies that local house corporation members, because it was not clear in which relation to either national or local house corporations, receive no compensation. So this just adds the word local to clarify which members receive no compensation for their volunteer duties.
Okay, proposed Amendment 54. The Finance Committee has proposed the language you see on the screen to allow the newly formed standing committee the flexibility to serve the fraternity in its best financial interests by allowing an annual investment policy statement that can be reviewed annually by the Finance Committee and approved by the Executive Board annually, rather than being restricted to biennium review by an entire convention body. And I think it's back to you, Laura.
Okay. Amendment 55 discusses fundraising and who needs to approve any fundraising done by a chapter, a house corporation, the fraternity, etc. It is now not a notification to the executive board, but it is approval by the executive board that needs to be sought before a fundraising project can be initiated by any entity.
Okay, proposed amendment 56 clarifies that it is in fact the adoption by the executive board of an interim amendment until ratification by and at the next convention. So it's a clarification. Amendment 57 is entertaining Article 17 in its entirety. You have been sent the current Article 17 that was amended as an interim in the biennium as what exists today. You also, for clarification, have a copy of the proposed clean final Article 17. You also, for transparency, have Article 17 in its final red line state with a key at the top of colors so you can see what language moved and where it went. You also, because it has been strongly recommended by our legal counsel to clarify what lives in the bylaws and what lives in a new document. Yes, there is the red line, colorful. You've also received the Fraternity Membership Discipline Procedures document, which is not a bylaws document. But in the interest of being transparent with all of our members, we want to ensure that you know where this language is going to reside and what it looks like. This document is not for consideration by the delegates. However, going forward, it will always need approval by the executive board, from the bylaws committee, and legal counsel before amending. So you see a clean copy of that, and you also have a colorful red line of that one as well. Why this is being presented for bylaw approval. The subcommittee began its work in this biennium over a year ago, but several bylaws committees have been looking at Article 17 for years. Upon work, it was determined that the entire article really should be addressed and incorporate current practices. It was also determined that a separate document removing some of the procedural sections of Article 17 be placed in the new document, Fraternity Membership Discipline Procedures. This is the same way we handle policies. It's the same processes that we use in other areas of the fraternity. The benefits of this split of the bylaws and procedures. The bylaws define how a person becomes a member, remains a member, and is no longer a member. Per legal counsel, all details of that need to be retained in the fraternity bylaws, and they are included in this proposal of Article 17. Procedures are fulfilled by staff at executive office that protect both the fraternity and the member. The Fraternity Membership Discipline Procedures contains part of what was in Article 17 and is updated to reflect the current practices of the Fraternity Membership Committee and executive office. Contained within the Fraternity Membership Discipline Procedures are additional new language that is exactly what is in the current standards, conduct, academic, and finance committee manuals, and the 10-day emails provided to all members with a fraternity level recommendation. The Fraternity Membership Discipline Procedures document, like I said, is only to be amended with the input, guidance, and approval of the Executive Board, Bylaws Committee, and legal counsel. Procedures, as we all know, need to be more fluid than every 2-year amendments at convention. The movement of these procedures to that new document is in alignment with other fraternity procedures and processes. Proposed Amendment 58A. The current language that you see on the screen, completely stricken, is in conflict with the Fraternity Membership Status Committee having final and binding authority in membership discipline proceedings, and with the Board of Review in existence. The Board of Review has not been utilized since the existence of the Fraternity Membership Status Committee. It is on strong recommendation of legal counsel that this section be removed, as it is in conflict with the final authority of the FMSC. Proposed Amendment 58B completes the removal of the language contained in the Board of Review. The current language, like I said, is in conflict with the FMSC having final and binding authority. Thus, the Board of Review would not be listed in the powers of the Executive Board in Article 9. And I believe I will turn it over to Laura.
Yeah, make sure if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. But thank you everyone for hanging in there. We are getting to the more procedural group bylaws amendments now, and we're getting closer to the end. So thank you all for those of you that have hung through all of this. Amendment 59 is a wording change throughout the bylaws to change a member in good standing instead of being of. They are in good standing with the fraternity. So this just changes every instance that this is comes up to the more correct wording.
Okay, proposed amendment number 60. Again, as Laura stated previously, this is just clarifying language that the Executive Board can designate a fraternity representative to seek the emblems that need to be bestowed or surrendered. Back to Laura.
Okay, proposed amendment 61 is in relation to house corporations, and that again designated fraternity representatives would be assigned for any review of house corporations. So again, it's just trying to make sure that we have consistent language throughout the document. Deborah?
Thank you, Laura. Proposed Amendment 62 clarifies the language of referencing policies and procedures. It currently reads policies and per legal counsel, it is suggested to switch that to policies and procedures. And that also brings the fraternity bylaws into consistent language with all of the model bylaws utilized by the alumni, collegiate chapters, and house corporations. And Jane?
Okay, proposed amendment number 63. The Bylaws Committee is just putting forth more grammatically readable language there to define a college woman. Proposed amendment number 64 is being proposed due to the upcoming officer structure changes that will happen with committees and officers in the fall of 2020. This proposed amendment allows us to walk between both what our current bylaws define as standards committee, which will morph in the fall of 2020 to conduct, academic, and finance committees. Keeping this all together will allow us to operate in both worlds until the officer structure changes in the fall. And then during the next convention in 2022, it will be proposed to remove the word standards to accurately reflect the modernized committee structure of collegiate chapters. Questions? Okay, back over to myself. Proposed amendment number 65. This is being proposed just to widen the opportunities for use of the Collegiate Chapter Reserve Fund to rename it the Collegiate Chapter Educational Fund, and it will help defray the costs of collegiate training, education programs, and experiences beyond and just strictly stating convention. Okay, number 66, Laura.
Yeah, this is also relating to National Housing Endowment Fund. This allows a broadening of the funds and how they can be used to assist chapters. In practice, expenditures from the funds have not been limited to net income. By substituting funds in for the net income from aligns with practice and provides greater flexibility to needs for funds, which can vary year by year. And as we're seeing during this pandemic time, house corporations have needed to go into their National Endowment Fund to be able to help defray costs of houses being closed or other related expenses that have come down. So this helps them meet their short-term financial commitments when unforeseen circumstances happen. So it broadens the ability for them to have access to their chapter's National Housing Endowment Fund. Deborah and Kimberly.
Yes, the last two amendments we discussed earlier, 67A and B. So your Bylaws Committee thanks you, and we will turn it back to Kimberly.
Well, thank you to our amazing Bylaws Committee. It has been an honor and an absolute pleasure to watch you work on TriDelta's bylaws this biennium. Karen White, our CEO, do we have any further questions or any other discussion that needs to be brought up?
No, we do not, Sister President, Sister Delta.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you to all the participants on today's call. I am so impressed by the detail of your questions earlier and how much you truly care about our fraternity. Thank you for hearing the business resolution from the Executive Board and also for hearing the reason for the proposed amendments from the LDC and from the Executive Board. So what is next? Please share and discuss these proposed bylaws amendments with your chapter. We realize that during this time, many of you are having virtual chapter meetings. It is important for you as the voice of your chapter that you know in advance how your chapter feels about each amendment in question. You will need to know this in order to prepare for the legislative session at convention. If you have a comment about a particular amendment, please have this prepared in advance so you are ready to speak from the virtual convention floor. In addition, during the business meeting, please make sure you have access to the proposed bylaws amendments so you can follow along and be able to vote on behalf of your chapter. So let's go over some upcoming dates. On July 1st at 7 p.m., all voting delegates are encouraged to attend the convention bylaws orientation session before the general business meeting on July 11th. This will provide more information on the platform we will be using during our business meeting at convention and will explain how to vote, ask questions, and debate any amendments. I do also want you to know that there will be individual training will be available from Executive Office Events team during office hours to ensure delegates are prepared for the business meeting. This individual training is for training on the virtual platforms. It is not for discussion of the content of the proposed amendments. So if you have any questions or any concerns about the platform, we will have office hours for that. And on July 11th at 10 a.m. Central Time, we will be having our business meeting during our virtual convention where all delegates will be responsible for voicing their chapter's votes for the 2020 proposed bylaws amendments. If you have any questions after this town hall, please email bylaws@trideltaeo.org. As a reminder, this call has been recorded and will be available for members who would like to listen to it again or who are unable to join today. On behalf of your Executive Board and the Bylaws Committee, I want to thank you for joining us today. Your involvement and engagement in this process is very important for the future of TriDelta. Please continue to stay safe, and I will see you all virtually in July.